Hey there, TouchDesigner programmers, Matthew here. So, what a wild, crazy summit we all had. It was rad, and super wild. One of the exciting things that Zoe and I had an opportunity to do was to teach a fun and exciting workshop on working with large systems and thinking about how we can approach this from a modular perspective. So the workshop was called Modular Architectures, and we looked at lots of different complicated pieces. Where we're headed today is how we can think about having lots of freedom and flexibility to configure our project on the fly without actually having to change the network itself in lots of ways. Many of us are accustomed to the experience of setting up for 1 gig, diving in, making changes, saving, and ending up with this wild, crazy set of spaghetti for how we move from project to project. And our hope is that, let's say, for example, we have a gig one day where we have a controller and 3 screens, an LED wall, a projector, an LED wall. The next day we have a gig where it's just an LED wall and a projector. Rather than having to change around my network to do all that work, what I really want to be able to do is say, just edit a single JSON file, save these changes, dive in here to my project, restart it, and see that sure as shooting, everything has changed without me having to actually go around and do all that work manually. That also means that when I start to think about how I build my project, rather than having to have a project that's specific for every single installation or gig, instead, I have a project that's consistent across those gigs, but my config file is actually what moves from job to job. So again, one job I've got 1 computer doing all this work. On another job, I have 2 computers that have split up this work. So, there are lots of ways that we might wrangle how we're approaching some of that problem, and that's exactly what we're going to dig in today. You can find all of the source files for this here on GitHub. You can find that on our Mir Lab GitHub, or you can go to mir.works. And here on the workshops page, there's a drop-down for the TD Summit 2019, and this is under Modular Architectures. This has got a little bit of a walkthrough for all the things that we're going to talk about today, as well as a link to the repo where all of this handy dandy stuff lives. The other thing you'll find there is that our project has a, drum roll please, a finished version of the project and then a starting version of the project. We're going to start with this starting large systems example, and we're going to build all the way up to that finished example. So this way we'll have a kind of nice way to work our way through from beginning to end. There's a few different convenience pieces that I've already put together for us so that we don't have to build everything from scratch. But hopefully you'll see that all of that code is fairly well documented, and you can take it apart as you please, use the pieces that you like, throw away the pieces that you don't, scratch your head, ask questions, you name it. This is for you to kind of get your hands wrapped around how can you think about a modular approach that doesn't require quite as much custom work, and how can you think about a configuration approach as a way to solve problems when you've got gigs back-to-back or jobs back-to-back and you want to be able to reuse as much of your code as you possibly can. Okay, enough of all that rambling. Let's start making some cool, fun things. Okay, so where are we going to go with all this? I'm going to go ahead and close up this external editor. We're going to use that just in a little bit. We're going to start here in our project first by digging in to our large systems folder. And let's go ahead and fire up this large systems 2019, TD Summit 2019 large systems TOE file. This is going to act as our starting point for our project. And this is really a chance for us to think about how are we going to start building and thinking about some of these kind of core essential pieces here that we're going to work with. Now, I've left a bunch of kind of starting scripty stuff here for us to get going so we don't have to build things. We'll talk about a few of the kind of convenience features that are built in here, as well as the methodology and kind of ideology around some of how this is thinking, some of how this is organized. We can also see that here on the top level of our project, this base large system, base, it's got a set of external parameters, and it's pointing at a config file, an output list, and this goofy thing called touch start, and we'll talk about that as we go along. But before we get there, it's worth thinking about why would we take a modular kind of approach anyway? Most of us are already actually pretty accustomed to the notion of working modularly in TouchDesigner. We use containers, we use bases, we use geometry. We use all of these top-level components as kind of abstract layers as a way of organizing our project. And we're going to push that just one step further. And instead of thinking about that exclusively as how we organize our TOE file, we're going to think about how we can use that to organize our project from a file perspective. Because that means that if we're working on a team, even if we're just working by ourselves, if we're using a version control system, we've got a better way of kind of seeing what's changed from one slice to the next. That's really helpful in a lot of ways. It also gives us the flexibility to swap in and out whole components without having to really, be stuck in the space where you have something that's embedded and works only for a particular project. So to get started, we're going to add a base. I like to think of kind of 4 primary bases that live in my projects. And we're going to start with one called tools. So I'm going to call that base_tools. I'm going to go to the common page while I'm here. I'm going to give that a global op shortcut, tools, because I want to be able to reach out to this from anywhere in my network. The other kind of like philosophical piece in this is that as we start to think about how this works, the other important thing is that when you start to build distributed systems that run across lots of different machines, you have to like wrangle your brain in a slightly different way, because what shows up on machine A versus machine B might be different configurations, right? So you have one machine that's responsible exclusively for being the controller that's driving all of the others, and you have another stack of machines that are responsible for rendering. There are some things that all the machines need. They all need to be able to communicate with one another. But the output machines might not necessarily need the controller interface. And likewise, the control interface might not need all the complex projection mapping or LED mapping that one of the render nodes needs. So this is, part of this is kind of a convention for helping us think about how do we organize things that have to be distributed. What lives here in the base layer of our project is going to be things that all of the projects need, all of the machines need regardless. I also, both at Obscura and in my own work, we use this convention of externalizing toxes as a way of being able to use version control and track what we've changed from project to project. And we had our very own kind of tox mechanism that we used for that particular part of the process. But I took a little time and rewrote that in a slightly different way that's not as specific to only the approach that we used at Obscura, but something that's a little more flexible for how we can use the same ideas in our own work.